אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם אדוני, עושה שמיים, שמיים בארץ, על ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומריך, הנה לא ינום ולא יישן שומר ישראל, אדוני שומרך, אדוני צילך ליד ימינך, יומם השמש לא יככה, וירח בלילה. אדוני ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, אדוני ישמור את צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם. Psalm 121. I turn my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. Adonai will not let your foot give way. Your guardian will not slumber. The guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Adonai is your protection, a guardian at your right hand. By day the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. Adonai will guard you from all harm and guard your life. Adonai guards your going and coming, now and forever. I'm Cantor Ilana Wolpert of B'nai Israel congregation in the Washington, D.C. area. I've flown to Cleveland to be present for my dear, dear friend, Hallie Guttridge, and her family as they begin a very difficult and painful journey toward healing from the untimely death of Rob, Hallie's husband, life partner, friend and comrade in arms for what would tomorrow have been 34 years. And of course, the father of their children, Jake and Madeline. I met Hallie and Rob when I was here serving as a cantor at Congregation Bethanu, where they were members, and had the privilege of training both Jake and Madeline for their B'nai Mitzvah. But our connection actually began before that, when we all lived in Dayton, Ohio. We hadn't yet officially met. Hallie and Rob belonged to Temple Beth Or, while my family belonged to Temple Israel, but we were aware of each other and knew many people in common, a phenomenon quite typical of Jews in a way that can be a little hard to explain to others. When I returned to my hometown of Cleveland after 25 years away and missed Dayton very much, it was great to find out that Hallie and Rob were here too. And it was nice that they could serve me as a reminder of the wonderful, meaningful life I had lived in Dayton. Now, I am here to offer Hallie, Jake, and Madeline some comfort, because that's what friends do. And of course, I extend this offer to Rob's two brothers, Michael and Bruce, and to their families, to cousins, and to friends who have come to mourn today, and to all those people whose lives were touched and changed by Rob in all kinds of ways. I will try and help them to reconcile and to recover from this profound and sudden loss, this huge tear in the fabric of their lives. We will all, in fact, be part of this attempt together as we stand close by them and support them, as we walk them through this dark passage. At moments like this in our lives, we Jews fall immediately back on our tradition, which comforts us by reminding us that many have passed this way before us and have come through it amazingly, somehow healed and ready to march forward, though certainly changed in profound ways. We turn to the thoughts, the prayers, the common sense of our Jewish legacy, and more importantly than anything, the powerful sense of community we Jews know how to create, which tells this family who is suffering so profoundly, you are not alone. We are all here with you. So I will start by quoting Ecclesiastes, or as it's known in Hebrew, Kohelet, which we just read a little bit over a week ago, on the Shabbat in the middle of the Sukkot holidays, which have so recently ended. Just last Saturday, I read from Kohelet, La kol zman ve'et lechol chefetz tachat hashamayim. A season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for dancing and a time for wailing, a time for birthing and a time for dying, a time for speaking and a time to keep silent, a time for seeking and a time for losing. The writer of Ecclesiastes, known as Kohelet, but who is most probably King Solomon, understood that there was a force out there that had fashioned us as creatures who would live our lives along a spectrum of moments, each one offering a different facet of experience, sometimes completely contradictory. We are destined to triumph and to fall, to fear and to overcome, to laugh and to weep, all for the purpose of bringing us to a moment in which we can say, I have lived my life to the fullest, and I am satisfied. I mention this because Hallie's sister Judy related to me a very poignant reflection made by Rob last Saturday night, the very evening after we Jews had heard Kohelet read in the synagogue. Rob had gone through a terrifying experience in late August, a medical emergency that caused him to say to Hallie on the phone, call 911, I'm dying. A timely surgery saved his life at that time, and Rob was clearly living life with that heightened sense of awareness of human mortality that such close calls awaken in us. Even though the surgery seemed to have put Rob back on track, and despite the fact that he had gone back to work after this terrifying incident, Rob was moved to acknowledge there in that unremarkable Chinese restaurant over a meal shared with Judy and Hallie that sometimes people die young. He mentioned the recently deceased rocker Tom Petty, and also a next-door neighbor who had gone to school with Hallie who had died an untimely death. Contemplating this sad fact, Rob went on to reflect how satisfied he was with his own life. He had recently mentioned on social media how gratifying it was to him that the result of his being accepted by one medical school, Boston University, was all it took to set him on the career trajectory of his dreams. Having suffered from tracheal tumors as a child, he had decided that, knowing himself what it felt like not to be able to breathe, he would strive to help people with breathing problems. He had reached a level of excellence as a pediatric pulmonologist, a place where he was highly regarded by colleagues and superiors. The three best parts of his life, he said in summary that evening, were being accepted to BU Medical School, marrying Hallie, and having Jake and Madeline. Having just mentioned Rob's respiratory system, I want to move on to talk about his heart, because that deserves its own mention. As everyone I talked to remarked to me, from his son Jake to wife Hallie to good family friend Linda, and as I know from my own relationship with Rob, this man was a gentle soul, a man with a lot of room in his heart. As Jake very clearly put it to me, a man who always put others' needs in front of his own, who was a calming influence in the midst of any kind of turmoil. The people with whom I spoke continually used the word rock to describe the firm foundation Rob consistently provided for others. As anyone who knew Rob knows, they would be firmly supported by him. His generous spirit would reach out, ready to understand and to offer whatever was being asked for. Jake made eminently clear to me how important his father was in his life and how selfless Rob was when there was something Jake needed. While Rob was Jake's rock, Jake was Rob's rock star. Madeline enjoyed an extremely close relationship with her father as well. I remember how glowingly proud Rob was of Madeline's performance at her bat mitzvah. And I know how proud he was of the young woman she's become. And Madeline, I know you will go on doing things to make your father proud. I find it fascinating, this is something I did not know before, that Rob's middle name was Copley. When I heard that, I thought, what Jew has a middle name Copley? But think of that little morpheme, cope. It says a lot. One of Rob's cousins, Amy, still calls him that as a nickname, and it speaks to the fact that Rob Cohn could cope and that he knew how to help others to cope. This is the very least one looks for in a physician of any stripe, and Rob went way beyond that as a physician. In fact, I have my own little story about Dr. Rob Cohn and his bedside manner that combined kindness, tranquility, and a true sense of compassion for patients and for their families. My nephew, who has lived in Toledo now for a good number of years, took his little son to Rob when Rob was practicing in Toledo. 1-year-old Grayson, it seemed, was suffering from an acute asthma, Rob explained patiently, kindly, calmly to my nephew, a kind of asthma that was brought on by autumn air and some of the pollution it carries, like leaf mold. Ben left Rob's office feeling reassured and with a clearly laid out procedure to follow, which involved purchasing some kind of a breathing machine that would help little Grayson breathe more easily. Rob helped many, many people breathe more easily in many, many ways. For good reasons, he had been recommended by his peers to receive the Best Doctors in America award for the last few years. In Hallie, Rob found the perfect match. With his firm foundation supporting her, Hallie, who has her own amazing skill set, felt enabled to take on the mountains of paperwork that adult life throws at us all, the everyday decisions involved when one is raising a family, all the thousands of phone calls, errands, and demands made by home, health, family, pets, you name it. The stuff maybe a hardworking, high-ranking pediatric pulmonologist just doesn't have time for. Rob would say to Hallie, "You are the CEO of the Cohn Empire." Hallie and I have talked a lot over the years about good marriages and how they sort of settle into effective work teams. Hallie and Rob's marriage was one in which challenges could be met, problems solved, and to think that this marriage might not even have happened had Hallie gone with a no instead of a yes. She and a friend, Kathy, were contemplating going to a young professionals event here in Cleveland, and they were flip-flopping back and forth as women will do. Should we go? Should we not go? They finally decided that, well, we'll go, and if it's no fun, we'll just leave. It turned out to be fun. Hallie spotted a good-looking, tall guy in the corner, and she had the cojones to go up to him and say, "Are you alone?" Which only proves that it really doesn't matter what you say, you just have to say something. And the rest is history. Yesterday morning at synagogues all around the world, we Jews read the very last chapter of the Torah and immediately turned back again to the very beginning, Genesis and the creation of the world. Each and every year, Moses dies in that last chapter of Deuteronomy, and Adam and Eve appear right on the heels of that death, born once more into a brand new Garden of Eden. In this way, we Jews experience the dynamic of our story, which never really ends. It just circles back to renew itself year after year. Life is not linear, it curves. And it spirals on, generation after generation. Jake and Madeline, you are such an interesting mixture of both your parents. And of course, you know that your father lives on in you. And I add to that only the fact that Rob also lives on in the hearts of the patients he helped to heal, and in the hearts of their grateful families, and in my heart and in yours. Those of us who are blessed to know his kindness, his compassion, his quiet smile, and gentle ways. We Jews say that no one is ever really gone as long as there is someone to remember. We will all remember Rob, and he will always be with us. Moses was 120 years when he died, the Torah tells us, but his eyes were undimmed and his vigor unabated. Rob did not live as long as we all, and as surely he would have liked to live. But his end came as he was still clear-eyed and vigorous, like Moses. He was working hard at what he loved and making a difference. A rabbinic midrash tells us that when the moment of death, Moses' death arrived, God drew the breath out of him with a gentle kiss. I cannot answer the question for you as to why Rob had to die so young or in the way that he died. But I am convinced that God, whatever his reasons were, nevertheless knew how meaningful breath was to Rob Cohn and came for this beautiful healer as he did for Moses with a similarly gentle, loving kiss. We will miss Rob, but our departure from him is full of love and respect, and we will remember him. There are so many people who have words to share with us now about Rob. I'll give you the order, and then they will come up. We'll first hear from Jake and Madeline together, then from Rob's older brother, Dr. Michael Cohn, and from the younger brother, Bruce Cohn. Dr. Michael will be accompanied by his wife, Bobby, from a cousin, Rick Aaron, from Rob's oldest friend, Russell Litton, and then from some professional colleagues, Dr. Abdullah Gori, Sue Chirello, Dr. Ahil Chokse, and Dr. Adam Mezoff. So Jake and Madeline, I'll invite you up.
There are no words that can encompass this situation, no words that can encapsulate how unbelievable a person my dad was, and no words I can express to you to show how much I loved him. My family and I more than loved him. We counted on him to be a stabilizing force for all of us, and he was. He was happiest when we were happy, saddest when we were sad. I only wish now that I could tell him we were always happy because we had the privilege of having him as a dad, husband, and role model. He deserved no pain. I will never be as close to someone as I am with him. I can hope to be 1/10 the man that he was. You've heard, and a lot of you know who he was and the traits and qualities that made him who he was. In addition to how selfless, kind, caring, eloquent, and smart he was, I will always remember how he was so understanding. Whatever path I took, he would take the same. In times of challenge, I will try to channel his belief in me and his confidence that I can overcome and succeed. Just like the Rocky movies, which we'd watched together through the years and years, both he and I revolve around a small group of people who believe in us. He and my family's unconditional, unwavering belief in me is so powerful that it will permeate through to my day-to-day life, my experiences, challenging to simple, good to bad, and the way I carry myself from now to the end. Dad, as I told you on the phone, the day that this tragedy happened to you, I love you. But I also want you to know that love does not even begin to describe how I feel about you. I owe you the world, and I need to know that you have it now. Please stay with me, Mom, and Madeline as we face life without you. You gave everyone in this room the privilege of a lifetime by knowing you. Just like you wanted the best for us, we prayed today for a whole world more of the best for you. I love you, Dad.
I liked going to the YMCA with my dad and going out to eat with my dad, listening to Earth, Wind, and Fire and Maroon 5 in the car whenever we would go places. When I was little, my dad used to call me Madsky as a nickname. Even though he worked a lot, he used to tuck me in every single night when I was little. Last year in 2016, I went hiking for the first time with my dad. On the hike, we had s'mores and hot chocolate. I felt like my dad was a great listener. He was a great doctor. We traveled together as a family to a lot of different places like Salt Fork, Ohio, Dayton, Florida, and Toledo. I also had fun when you took my friend Bethany and I to the beach, the Boonshoft Museum, and to the malls. My dad went fishing in Canada every year with his brother. It maybe would have been fun to go, but he told me there were a lot of flies up there and I didn't want to wear a net over my head. I am going to miss watching TV and going to the movies with him. I thought my dad was a very funny guy. He was a great caring guy. I am also going to miss hanging out with Dad. If I could say anything one last time, I would say, Dad, I love you and thank you for everything you do for me.
Dr. Michael Cohn and Bobby.
Welcome and thank you for coming. We mourn such a wonderful human being, my brother Rob, who died so young, age 63. Rob, as you know, was dealt a very tough hand, as Alana mentioned, with a tracheal malignancy at age 11. He underwent a series of radiation therapy, a tracheostomy, multiple reconstructive procedures. This trauma that he faced with great strength and courage, and he didn't let any of this hold him back from achieving his dreams. I think there is great reason that Rob likely went into pediatrics and pulmonology because of these experiences as a youth. He and I shared so much. Our birthdays were less than a week apart. We went to the same college. We attended the same profession. Yet despite my trailblazing as the older brother, he far surpassed me. He was a brilliant man. He pursued a demanding academic career that included many leadership roles. He did significant research in cystic fibrosis, which was nationally recognized. He obtained an MBA in his spare time, I guess, at the University of Chicago in order to hone his managerial skills. He was respected and admired by so many, especially by myself. So kind, so compassionate, a role model. I don't think it's a total coincidence that his nephew, Brian, went into pediatrics. He was a true mensch, my brother. I've always been so proud of him. However, I think many of you know that he was kind of a quirky guy. If you've ever talked to him on the phone, when the conversation he decided was over, it was over. He loved to sleep. He was an expert at sleeping. Rob and I had a very strong bonding experience each year. We would spend a week together in Canada, fishing, doing something we both loved so dearly. We would accrue gear, talk about it. Once we finished that trip, we'd start planning for our next. We had more than 20 experiences this way, where we were in each other's presence for a full week, 24/7. Can you imagine? We never argued or had any disagreements. Rather amazing. We would catch up, cajole, confide, and counsel each other. Most of all, we would just laugh. As you know, Rob was a cool, calm guy, however, and he was a cool, calm fisherman also. He would fish mostly sitting down, whereas I'm being much more intense, would be standing the whole time we were in the water. However, our guide, who we had several years in a row, would say he could always tell when Rob had a good strike as he'd slowly start to stand. Over the course of our lives, we shared many wonderful trips and family celebrations. Our relationship was one of mutual love. Rob would always greet me with a hug and a kiss, never afraid to show his emotions. He was so calm and collected. I so admired his ability to be so composed under difficult, trying times. I will miss him so badly. I lost my best friend and my hero. May Rob's memory always be a blessing.
First of all, Yasher Koach to Alana. That was a beautiful, beautiful expression of Rob's life and character. When I speak to a group, I usually come prepared with papers with every word. I'm a little nervous about extemporizing because I'm always afraid I'm going to forget the most important part. On the other hand, my brother-in-law was masterful at extemporizing. And I said, how do you do that? And he said to me, it's easy. You just go in chronological order. I thought, okay, Rob, it's easy for you. Rob, as a tribute to you, I'm going to do it your way today. Only tissues here. Last week, we came to our Florida house. And we invited Bruce, Mike's younger brother, and his wife, Hetty, over for dinner. And Bruce suggested that we call Rob, find out how he's doing and catch up. So we thought, that's a great idea. So Bruce called Rob, and as usual, we got his voicemail. And Bruce left a very detailed message. Call us back, we're here, we want to talk to you. And a little while later, Bruce got a text. Looking forward to joining everyone in Florida. We have a big celebration coming up at our Florida house for Thanksgiving. Can't wait, we've got all our tickets. We had no idea that this was going to be our last communication with Rob. No idea. None of us knows how long we have on this earth or how long the person we're interacting with has on this earth. Wouldn't it be a wonderful tribute to Rob's memory if we all thought about that and acted perhaps a little more kindly, more compassionate, more forgiving, more generous, whether of spirit or resources? One of my friends said, we can't be buried in a shroud of our money. Let's use it wisely. Less judgmental, less gossipy. I think that would make Rob's memory for a blessing. In Judaism, we have an expression, tikkun olam. It means repair of the world. I think we can all be part of that to honor Rob's memory. Thank you.
Bruce, Rob's younger brother.
Hello, I'm Bruce, Robert's younger brother. We're all gathered here for a solemn and sad occasion to pay our respects to my next of kin, older brother Robert Cohn. But I think we should think of this as a gathering to celebrate and honor the accomplishments he has made over his lifetime. He was known to all of us as a different name. Some people called him Doctor, some called him Copley, some called him R, some called him Robert, some called him Dad, some called him Uncle, some called him Dr. Cohn. But for all of us, he touched our lives in a different way. His life was a blessing, living 50 plus years after being diagnosed with cancer in the early 60s. I remember the time he was diagnosed with that disease in 1964, when a doctor called my mother and told him that he wasn't going to live. At that time, my aunt had come over and my mother had told her that he wasn't going to live. And they both started to cry. I, being about 9 years old, had never seen two adults cry before. But as we know, that wasn't true. Unfortunately, we're here, but he lived 50 plus years to accomplish his mission. As a result, as I just said, he overcame that obstacle and decided he wanted to become a doctor and save the lives of people as doctors had saved his life. He was a hardworking, generous, dedicated, modest, and above all, a fighter. And I don't mean a fighter with his fists. I mean a fighter for survival and to accomplish his goal, which he was set on life to do, and that was of becoming a doctor. The time he came home from the hospital when he was 11 years old, I was so excited to see him, even though he had a plastic tube in his throat, and I had never seen anybody with a plastic tube in his throat before. That didn't stop him. He still was a kid, 9 years old. He still delivered newspapers at 5 or 6 in the morning, whether it was snowing or whether it was raining. All he wanted to do was live a normal life. He would wake up, do what he had to do. As a teenager, he would work in a mattress factory. Lifting mattresses didn't bother him, even though physically he might not have been up to it. He washed dishes during those years. And then, when he started college at the University of Pennsylvania, he had just had a skin graft, and that wasn't going to stop him. He still went there and irrigated his wound, being a teenager, so that he could just live a normal life and do what he had to do. After graduating for college, he applied to medical school and wasn't accepted that time. So eventually he had to work 2 years, but that was enough to allow him to apply again and be accepted, as has been stated before, at Boston University, eventually graduating towards the top of his class. He was so excited before that about being accepted to medical school and becoming a doctor that when his friend had an old desk that he was going to throw out, he wanted it, and he decided that he was going to help lift it up. He lifted it up 2 floors, and the thing must have weighed 100 pounds. When I saw him sitting in front of the door, he had this big smile on his face, and he was so excited. And I said, "How'd you get that up here?" He said, "I helped lift it up." And I looked at him, and I couldn't believe him. I said, "How could you lift that up here?" He says, "Well, I like sitting in front of it because it makes me feel like a doctor, and it makes me feel professional." After graduating from medical school, Robert, as we all know, went to practice in Ohio. Even though he didn't know anybody here, he just packed his bags and left. Eventually, he started a family, met his wife, Hallie, and had 2 children, Jake and Madeline. He practiced medicine for over 30 years, and as we all know, achieved success as an adjunct professor, director, and chairman. So let's be thankful that he was able to accomplish this, not mourn his life, but honor his life. Even though he will no longer be physically present with us, he will always be here, and I will always remember him. So Robert, I love you, I will always love you, and I always looked up to you.
Cousin Rick Aaron.
I wasn't planning on starting up by saying this, but when everybody brings up Robert's pet names, I had one myself that many people may not know of, and I used to joke around with him and greet him and say, "Hey, how's it going, Roberto?" and like that's for years, and I don't know, that was just a thing that we had. Robert was a good father who loved his kids very, very much. He loved his brothers a lot as well, and I know he really loved his wife, Hallie, and was really felt lucky that he had her. Robert was a good, kind, and genuine person. I didn't feel like I was in the presence of a doctor, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean it in a very positive way. That was how, being genuine, how he was. And I was very proud of his accomplishments and how growing up through illness, I remember him being ill when I was a kid, and how I believe it really made him the strong person he became, and how he wanted to dedicate his life to helping people, especially people with similar problems. I enjoyed being around Robert. It was kind of strange how we had this connection, even though I didn't see him as much as I would have liked to, maybe a couple times a year because of the distance. And it was very strange how, like on the phone, how he didn't really like to communicate much on the phone. He kind of had a reputation for people that knew him. And me being antisocial to a certain extent wasn't a great combination. So we really cared and loved each other, but, you know, we didn't really, you know, you wouldn't think that we were that close, but when he would come for a visit, it was like we were never apart. It was something else. I think that if we were in the same city, we would have done a lot together. I think we would have, he had a passion for fishing like myself. I think we would have went fishing all the time. I think we would have gone to movies. I think we would have done a lot together. And even though I'm not crazy about golf, I think maybe I would have even taken it up just to do more things with him at the time. You know, it was kind of tragic, I think, that when I was young to have moved, because, you know, I lost connections, unfortunately, on this unfortunate event. I reconnected with cousins that are beautiful people, and that I regret that we didn't have anything years before. And which is connected to Robert, you know, not me being able to be with Robert. And he talked about in the past, not in the further past and near past, of maybe retiring someday and coming to Florida and buying a condo. And I was awash with thoughts of how we were going to do a lot of fishing and go to the movies and do a lot of things, and maybe me take up golf. And I really believed that was going to happen. And a lot of other people missed out. You know, Michael and, you know, Bruce is down here. Michael and Bobby were going to be here a lot more, and we were going to all make those memories that maybe we didn't have the opportunity. I was going to, selfishly speaking, make those memories that I didn't make enough of with him, and I was very happy about that. And I regret that that's not going to happen. And he was just taken away way too soon. Thanks for listening.
Russell, Rob's friend from what, you were 6 years old? Yeah.
This is not where any of us expected to be today. And I almost have to pinch myself to realize that I'm here in a memorial chapel under these circumstances. Bob's loss has stunned and saddened us all. And we each knew him in a different way. He was a loving husband and father to Hallie, Madeline, and Jake, a devoted brother to Michael and Bruce, as well as a brother-in-law, cousin, and uncle to his extended family. To many present, he was an esteemed colleague who practiced medicine here in Ohio for 3 decades, and we'll be hearing more about that shortly. To me, he was my friend of 55 years. I referred to him a moment ago as Bob, but actually, apparently it's no secret now, it can be revealed. it was unnatural for me to call him with that name. For our entire lives, I called him by his middle name, Copley, or Cope for short. We shared a happy suburban childhood in the Boston area during the 60s, growing up across the street from each other. This was a tumultuous time for our country, and we were not ignorant of world events. Nevertheless, we did many of the fun things kids could do in those days. Swimming at the town lake, enjoying July 4th parades and town fireworks, sledding in winter, and building snow forts, and going to summer camp. As children, we quickly found common interests, especially in science. I remember I had a chemistry set, and if you remember in those days of the space race, they were readily available for kids to buy. It had all kinds of nasty chemicals in them, salts of bismuth and strontium, and we were learning how to pronounce them, stuff that would bring out a hazmat team today. We would often do experiments from the manual or just randomly mix things together to see what would happen. One story that has amused me tremendously over the decades I'd like to share with you. We were in my basement with another boy from our street playing with the chemistry set, and one of the jars had strips of metallic copper. So Cope gave the boy one of the strips, and he told him to hold it very tightly between his thumb and index finger for an experiment. And Copley lit our little alcohol torch, and he placed the flame under the other end. So a moment later, of course, the unfortunate young man singed his fingers and yelped in pain. And Copley started laughing hysterically and said the experiment had been a success. He had wanted to demonstrate the exceptional thermal conductivity of metals. Strangely, the boy lost interest in chemistry and never joined us again. We played wiffle ball and touch football on the street with Bruce and other neighborhood kids. We subscribed to fishing magazines, I think it was Field and Stream, and bought lures for our tackle boxes. Mine is quite rusty, but I still have it. We'd load our gear on our bikes and head to various streams and ponds in town, hoping to catch something worthy of bringing home for dinner. Cope continued to enjoy angling, and as we've heard, went with Michael every year to a lodge in the far north. He sent me pictures from their recent trip where he was holding a trophy pike that had to be over 4 feet long, and he was absolutely beaming. In addition, Bruce and I got interested in coin collecting, and we attended the occasional coin show and spent most of our spare cash buying the best coins we could afford, and I still have my collection. My memory of Copley's illness in the mid-60s is somewhat vague. Having cancer wasn't something that was discussed much, even among adults, and certainly kids were sheltered from this ominous diagnosis. Cope missed much of that school year. He had tutors come to the house so he could keep up with assignments, and ultimately his keen intellect, he didn't have to repeat the year. I remember going in to see him while he was recuperating, and radiation therapy of that era cured him, but it left him badly burned with a tracheostomy. He later required extensive skin grafting. Copley bravely accepted what had happened to him and learned to maintain his trach tube and change his dressings. I don't recall witnessing any episodes of self-pity, nor was he self-conscious about his wounds. With Cope, it was forward march. I have no doubt that as the defining event of his life, as Michael and Bruce so eloquently said, this episode, along with Michael's influence, definitely steered him to a medical career. Our college years brought us both to Penn, though I was 2 years behind him. We didn't room together, but I saw him a couple of times a week. Since his place had a kitchen and mine didn't, I went over there on many a Saturday night to cook dinner. Cope returned to Boston after graduation and worked at Mass General for a couple of years, reapplying to med school. And I graduated in the meantime, and we were both accepted at Boston University in 1978. So we decided to get a 3-bedroom apartment together with Bruce, and he lived with us for a while before moving to Florida. And we very much enjoyed the mutual support that living together fostered, because those 4 years I thought would never end, and having each other together was just wonderful. Copley was extremely studious, and his innate talents and devotion to the profession were clearly evident. He always said he didn't have the hands to be a surgeon, which was probably true because I never saw him repair anything. Rather, he had the capacity to analyze and solve medical problems. He found his niche working in peds, and he often described the satisfaction derived from making sick children better. And at the time, we all began calling him Copley-Cohn, the kitty's friend. He loved it so much, in fact, that even after a concentrated effort to earn an MBA in medical administration at Northwestern and doing a stint doing administrative work, he was drawn back to the clinic. After graduation from BU, he had some time before the calendar hit July 1st. I was planning a cross-country trip that summer. Cope moved out to Ohio, and I picked him up. We camped in the Badlands of South Dakota and took a helicopter ride over that barren landscape. We drove to Craters of the Moon National Monument in Idaho and then on to Wyoming. During our stay at Yellowstone, I woke up one morning and saw he wasn't in the tent. So I popped my head out and I saw the world had changed from green to white overnight. 4 inches of fresh snow was covering everything. And I guess he was cold and he didn't want to wake me up, so he just went into the car. But it didn't stop him from ribbing me for sleeping so late. Days later, we took mule rides to the bottom of Bryce Canyon, going back in geologic time as we descended. Recent rains had eroded some of the soil, and we searched for fossils there. Time was up, and Copley had to return to begin clinical training, but I recall this trip as one of the most carefree times we had ever had together. The burdens of school had disappeared, and new challenges had awaited us, and we were very much looking forward to them. The following year, I returned here for your wedding. In 1986, I began a trip around the world, and I made Cleveland my first stop so I could see Jake at 1 week of age. And the three of you came to my wedding, and we attended each other's children's B'nai Mitzvot. And the years go. Now in middle age with my children grown, I find greater nostalgia for those days of our youth. I recently took my mother back to our street. Constructed in the late 50s, it was frankly showing its age. With a little imagination, I could see Copley hitting the wiffle ball over the long phone wire that led to the Cohn household, which might have been a home run, except for the fact that I was in the outfield and caught it. My last conversation with Copley was shortly before Yom Kippur. He sounded stronger than he did on a previous call. He was recuperating and actually getting quite antsy to return to work. During the holiday, his recent medical scare was front and center in my thoughts during the portion of the service where we wonder who will be inscribed in the book of life and who will perish. I wish the pen were indelible, but sadly it is not. Individual lives may be cut short randomly and without reason. Even Dr. Robert C. Cohn, who served as fellows to improve the quality of life for the youngest in our society, was not immune to this cruel reality. Goodbye, my dear friend. Your memory will be with me always.
We'll hear from some professional colleagues now, beginning with Dr. Abdullah Gori.
I consider myself as a very fortunate individual because I had known Dr. Robert Cohn for 19 years. And I was his colleague for nearly a dozen years at Metro Health. He was a close friend and mentor to me as he was to hundreds of others like me. After hearing the news of Bob's sad and timely demise, I was brooding over my fond memories of him. I could speak about Bob forever, but I limit myself to sharing just a few fond memories that show what a great human being he was. My first memory goes back to 1998, when I met him for the first time. It was at the pediatric intensive care unit in Metro Health. I had worked all night, and he had just come in the morning. He noticed I was tired and hungry. His first question was, "Did you eat?" And his first act was to go and get food for me before talking about the patients. Bob truly cared for the welfare of the people around him. Didn't matter if you knew them for a minute or for a decade. At the end of the day, the first day I met him, all I wondered was, how could I be like him one day? Bob was truly inspirational and always left a lasting impression in the minds of his contacts. Many years ago, I heard the story just recently. Bob was in a school event and he had an iPod with him. A girl in her early teens who didn't have the luxury of possessing an iPod, who had never seen one, went up to him to find out what it was and how it works. The next thing Bob did was to find the mother of the child and paid her the money to buy the child an iPod. Bob always wished that every child be happy. A true pediatrician. A brand new employee who Bob had recently hired faced a personal emergency. That employee did not have the vacation hours to avail. He went up to the employee and said, "You can have as much time off as you need, and your position will not be affected. You have my word." Bob felt the pain of sorrow in others and was quick to help and console. Over the past week after he passed away, I spoke to quite a few physicians who he trained and worked with. Due to time limitations, I cannot list all the fond statements they made about him, but there was one message in common. I owe Dr. Cohn for what I am today and what my family and I have today. This is what most people said. I had the distinct pleasure of working very closely with Bob professionally. I can vouch that he was an extremely caring physician, sincere mentor to his colleagues and trainees, truly supportive of education and children, and above all, a wonderful human being from within. Bob, you may be physically gone, but will never be gone from the hearts you touched. Bob, you may be unseen and unheard. We may not be able to visit you or see you, but you will still be very close to all of us, still loved, still missed, and very dear. In our heart we are crying, but on our faces we are smiling, because we had the opportunity to know you and proudly say that we were friends and colleagues of Bob Cohn. Thank you.
Sue Chiarello.
Bob and I have been good friends since Dr. Martha Franz introduced us at Dayton Children's in 1988. He had just arrived from Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital post-fellowship to be our third full-time pulmonologist. Rainbow at that time was, and currently, a very progressive center for the treatment of cystic fibrosis, and we knew their pulmonologists and respiratory therapists to be the best. I, at that time, was director of respiratory care at Dayton Children's, and soon Bob was to be named my medical director. He immediately embraced this new role and engaged me on a journey of friendship and unbelievable professional growth. Bob was a visionary. On a personal level, he was the big picture guy. He didn't do all the details, and I was more of a detail operations person. He would often come to my office with a plan scratched on a piece of paper in his illegible handwriting, okay? And he'd say, "Make this happen." This happened over and over during our career together, and our successes even made us eager to do more. All my career, he challenged me and others that we worked with to grow, to improve our performance, to simplify processes, and to advance our science. And he did this without having to convince any of us. He just made every step seem logical. He was strategic, and his big picture view of medicine drove him to always seek more strategies to solve problems and system problems that he recognized in trends. He introduced respiratory therapy protocols that at Dayton Children's earlier than other departments across the country. These protocols allows respiratory therapists to provide the right care at the right time, anticipate probable outcomes, and intervene as needed. It was a real safety plus for our hospital. He also demanded very high performance standards of our respiratory therapists that made us valued clinicians and gained us the respect to recruit and retain some of the best clinicians in the country. Rob's dedication to respiratory care was evident outside of Dayton Children's. He served after being appointed by Governor Taft and others for 12 years on the Respiratory Care Board, which is the regulatory board for the state of Ohio for respiratory therapists. He served with me, along with some other people we have in the audience here today. And he led our Scope of Practice Committee, sharing his wisdom and authoring many practice guidelines for respiratory therapists in the state of Ohio. He also volunteered to be a surveyor for what we called at that time the Joint Review Committee for Respiratory Therapy Education. He went all over the country to validate the quality of respiratory care programs. He also lectured over many years for our National Association's Asthma Education Certification Program to assure that respiratory therapists across the country did know how to do asthma prevention well. In 2007, he was named a Fellow of the American Association of Respiratory Care. At that time, I think there were only about 100 in the country. Tom Kallstrom, who currently is the executive director of the American Association for Respiratory Care, actually worked with Rob at Rainbow Babies and Children's, and he sends his condolences today. Also, the Ohio Society for Respiratory Care sends its prayers and wants to thank Rob and his family for allowing him to be the medical director of our state efforts for over 8 years. Bob was all about advancing the science of medicine. He published many articles and abstracts, and he also engaged a lot of us in publishing as well. He led our evidence-based practice committee this last month, chaired our asthma and bronchiolitis clinical practice guideline teams, always kept us ahead of the curve. This past Monday, he and I submitted his last chapter he owed to Dr. George Burton in his 8th edition of a textbook that's used by 80% of the programs in the country. We submitted that on Monday. And Dr. Burton sends his sincere sympathies as well. What I will most miss about Bob is his wisdom. I've always thought of myself as a pretty good troubleshooter. Whenever I was stumped, though, with something clinical or operational, political, personal, he was my go-to guy. Bob would always have the right answer no matter what. Often it would be a creative but simple solution, one that I would have overlooked or not considered. But sometimes his answer would be, "Why are you wasting your time on that? This is what's more important." And he was always right. He was an efficiency expert, might be why he stopped his phone conversations and things like that. But he was always reminding me to put my energy into things that mattered, just like he did. We were both in healthcare leadership, and anybody who's in that knows you face stresses every once in a while. We were always looking out for each other, though, and making sure that we projected in a positive way. We could recognize when one of us would need to talk, and he would say, "Hey, I'll be down later to talk to you." I think most of all, I will miss those closed-door sort of venting sessions that we shared to periodically center ourselves. I wish I would have invited him over for dinner more often. However, I often got home late, and he finally kind of learned that if he came over, it would be late. And he would often decline, saying he wanted to be in bed early. He referred to himself as a simple country doctor. I think he enjoyed the simple things in life and often simplified life for the rest of us, but he was far from being a simple doctor. He mentored all of us beyond our expectations, and his patients, who he loved and who loved him, received only the best always. I'd just like to say, Hallie and family, please accept my sincere sympathies. He was a wonderful man, a friend, and we will dearly miss him. Thank you.
Dr. Achil Chokse.
I am not Jewish by heritage. I am not American by birth. And I'm certainly not white, with whichever parameter you look at. But you didn't need to be any of those to realize, recognize, and respect a fine, distinguished man like Bob. It was my good fortune and privilege just to work with him for merely 23 months while at Metro Health Medical Center. It was those 23 months which taught me way more than my entire medical school and MBA from Kellogg's. He prepared, he mentored, he nurtured, and he ensured that I had all ways and means to be wildly successful. He did subscribe to a philosophy of living at let live. And in the process of doing that, he ensured that each and every one of us who were around him, they had the ways and means and resources to do their very best each and every day. My wife Namita and Hallie equally hated both of us to be there at 5:30 in the morning in Department of Pediatrics at Metro Health Medical Center. But boy, those were the days, and that is what got me out of bed each and every day. Bob truly was very, as you heard from each and every one of us, he was really taller, bigger than life in every way and mean. I really think it's a great sadness, and it's a big loss to all of us. The only way I think I can justify Bob's early and certainly untimely demise is up in the heaven. God really needs kind-hearted, sincere, heartwarming people to make that place even better. I really will miss him, and people like Bob don't ever leave this planet. They will live in our minds, thoughts, and our hearts. I sincerely appreciate Hallie, and I reach out to Jake and Maddie for expressing my thoughts on this what is personal and meaningful occasion. Thank you very much.
And Dr. Adam Mezoff.
I'd also like to thank Hallie and your family for not only giving a moment to talk about Bob, but for having shared him with us. My name is Adam Mezoff, and I have the honor of being the Chief Medical Officer at Dayton Children's. I first met Bob 25 years ago when we were both on staff there. Bob left in 1997, but I was able to convince him to come back in 2014 as the head of our pulmonary division and ultimately our Associate Chief Medical Officer. It would be really hard for me to overstate what Bob has meant to our hospital as a whole and me personally as an individual. He was so many things for all of us: a mentor, a colleague, an innovator, a voice of reason, and a teacher. But most important to me, he was my friend. He helped us realize the responsibility that we have in providing family-friendly care, as well as the importance of working well together with staff, administration, colleagues, all together to achieve great things. and Bob achieved great things. It would take me far too long to list all of the important contributions he's had, but suffice it to say that Dayton, Ohio is a much better place because Bob was there. As I said, he was an innovator. He always seemed to come up with better ways of doing things. I would periodically take Bob out to dinner as both of our schedules were hectic and we never seemed to be able to carve time out during the day. And while I thought I was doing it to keep him informed of things going on at the hospital, Bob always would provide insights that would invariably provide me with a better idea of how to do things. He would add a new perspective and give me a way of looking at things that helped me better resolve challenging issues in a reasoned and kind way. And I always felt when I discussed things with Bob, I would ultimately get so much more than I gave. His wisdom and innovative spirit always shone through in our conversations. I only wanted to say a few words, but to conclude, I came here today to try and say goodbye to Bob, but I realize I can't ever do that. I'm a changed man and doctor, and all for the better because I knew him, and I'll carry that with me for the rest of my life. He helped our hospital chart a path for success that will continue on because he was with us, and he gave us the benefit of his wisdom. We'll see the road ahead of us different because of the vision he gave us. We'll work together better because of the collaboration he taught us, and we'll be kinder to our patients because of the gentle way he touched all of us. I thank you.
Before we conclude with the Kaddish prayer, I want to announce that the family will receive friends at the residence, which is 75 Mill Hollow Drive, Moreland Hills, Sunday today, following services and internment, until 8 o'clock p.m. Tomorrow, Monday, and Tuesday, from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., and then again from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Friends who wish to contribute can make their donations to the Dayton Children's Hospital. Please rise as the mourners recite, Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divra kirute v'yamlich malchute, b'chaye chon u'v'yomei chon, ובחיי דכל בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבא מברך לעלם ולעלמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום, עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.